Hey friends, Dennis Cortez here. I'm a designer who codes, teaches, and makes music. In today's video, first of all, I have a bit of an update for you guys. Since my last video, I have decided to leave my role at Mothership. I'm joining a company called Northstar as their head of design, which is very exciting. I've been a fan of Northstar for a bit now, and their founder is actually a designer that I know of. And I'm excited to be working with the team there, and I think it's a really good role for me for the future. So just a little update there, but because of that, I wanted to show how I actually interview for new roles. So I wanted to make this like a very candid discussion. I'm just going to be very open and transparent about the way that I interview. I want to put a disclaimer here that this is of course not the absolute best way to interview. To be honest, it's very hard to interview. I've noticed that at all levels of design. In terms of the preparation, the performance anxiety, trying to prepare for like whiteboarding sessions and cultural discussions around the company, it can be very daunting and stressful to work on this stuff. So the way that I like to interview, this is specifically for like the first interview that I have where I'm presenting who I am, kind of talking over my beliefs around design and how I like to work with others and my process, etc. So this is for that first initial discussion that I have. So what I like to do and what I recommend, first of all, is preparing some sort of slide deck for them to be able to show this. So I actually just do this in Figma. As you can see, there's nothing too special going on here. I'm just putting some slides in Figma and actually sharing my screen and walking through them because of the nature of Zoom calls and remote interviews nowadays. So let's go ahead and go through this slide deck and I'll talk through my thoughts and my approach for each one as we go through it. So first of all, my biggest recommendation is to personalize your whole slide deck. So what I mean by that is, for example, with this one with Northstar, I ended up putting like their logo on the front of the slide deck that I'm working on. And I actually, put the date that I'm interviewing to kind of give some personalization and show that I'm putting a bit more effort into detail and showing, hey, I'm invested in this company. I really want to work here. So this is part of why I'm doing that. So another bit of advice here is I wouldn't open up straight to like actually talking about work. You want to kind of break down the barrier of bringing your true self to that interview and have more of a conversational approach when you're doing interviews. So what I like to open up with is a little bit about me. So I talk about my history. I talk about where I'm from. I grew up in South Florida. I went to college in Nashville. So I have a little bit of a blurb here. And then I kind of talk about, stuff that I like to do outside of work. So I want people to get to know the full me and know what I'm bringing to the company. I'm not just another employee that just wants to come and earn my salary and just go home. I'm a person with my own thoughts and feelings and my own passions. And I want to work with people that are open about that too. So with this, I'm trying to actually show that and kind of get a sense and a feel for them because I typically ask them to also introduce themselves before I go into this. I also like to show, an embarrassing photo of me, as you can see here. It's just a funny little photo of me when I was younger. So I think it kind of breaks the ice, gives a little bit of laughter there. I talk a bit about my pets and also my partner, and I open up with that. So next I like to go over my work history. So here I'm discussing all the good stuff that I've done and all the achievements that I've done. Here I recommend don't be shy, like give yourself the credit that you deserve. Show that you can work here, that you are adept and able to work in this environment and that you've done it before and you have experience in this space. So here I kind of go all out. I talk through I have like the main points here, but I'm also like talking over this, not reading this word for word. I just, have these as little checkpoints and some visuals for others to see. So I talk over each of these companies and give a little bit of the background of what I did at this point. And then I also wanted to show some of the notes that I have. So I don't actually show this like in the interview. This is from Notion, just some notes that I have. And I just want to show that you should be talking about your current responsibilities as well. So give them the most up-to-date information in terms of what you're doing day to day. At this point, I also recommend talking about what you're looking for in your next role. Give some context up front so that you can have discussions around that and they can maybe give some advice or some insight into how it is working there that's actually around the goals that you want, and you can actually see if it's a good fit or not for both parties. Just a quick plug, I just want to point out that a lot of you are watching the videos on the channel and I really, really appreciate it, but I would love if you all could actually subscribe because if you see here, there's a ton of people that are watching the videos but not subscribing. And I hate to be that person, but it actually really, really helps the channel. So if you can just take a second and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Also a heads up, I do have a Patreon where I post a lot of early content. Like you get videos like this early and you get behind the scenes. So if you want some extra content, feel free to check that out at patreon.com/shyboytm. And I also make a lot of music. So if you're looking for new music and want some music that's really good to have in the background while you're working or studying, etc., feel free to check it out at cortez.us/music. And there are links in the description for all of that as well. So this next slide that I go over is actually why I want to work at that specific place. So for North Star, I'm big around like financial education, and I think that's an important part of what should be available in the world. So I want to work on that problem. I talk about, how I've learned about finances the hard way and how I really want to work with people to make sure that they're not experiencing that as well. I also talked about, the potential for ownership and leadership because like I said, I went into the head of design role. So working in leadership and building a team was a big thing for me looking in my next role. So I wanted to bring that up here early in the process and say, I know that North Star is looking for this specific role and this type of leadership, for example. So that's part of the reason that I want to work here. Show them that you're really interested in the specific role that they're hiring for. And then a quick point here, again, I'm doing personalization. So this graphic is actually from their website and this photo as well. I don't think people will mind if you will just grab it and, it's kind of some familiarity, some recognition, and you show that you kind of went out of your way to try and personalize this for the company that you're interviewing with. The next part I like to go over is my mindset and my approach to work. So how I mentally kind of approach work and how I like to work with others. So here are my 6. I won't go over them, but you can read them. But I recommend that you kind of look inward and really think about what are the foundational elements of my work and how I think about life in general, and how do I bring that to this company that I'm interviewing with. So give them some context in terms of like what your morals are, what your beliefs are around work. And I think that will kind of help set the precedence to see if, does the company have the same morals that you do? Because if you're interviewing at a company, you want to make sure that they kind of share a lot of the same goals and passions that you do. So I recommend putting this in your slide deck too. And then next, on the other side of that is I talk about actually like my process. So in a practical sense, like how do I work day to day with people? What's my approach to my design process and how I like to work and think holistically, etc. So again, I would think about how do you approach work and customize like how you want to portray that to this company. And again, in these parts, like do not be afraid to really sell yourself. Like you owe it to yourself. And this is a good point to be able to do that. So I recommend like really digging deep, thinking about this and just giving yourself all the credit that you deserve in these spots. So this is one of the parts that I'm just being like completely transparent with you in terms of how I like to work. So I like to actually show my process. It's like my guiding process in terms of how I like to work, which is the double diamond process. I can go over it in more detail in maybe another video, but just for this sake right here, this is just like the overview and diagram that I show. And then I talk through just like at a high level what I do in terms of like working from beginning to end. I don't go over every single part of this, but just want to show in detail kind of how I approach work. I recommend that you figure out exactly what works for you and maybe create a visual around it if it's applicable. If not, you can maybe show work examples instead. I find a lot in design that there's a lot of like flashy terminology and a lot of buzzwords that people use. So I want to show this company that, this isn't just like some diagram I pulled off the internet that I don't actually like believe in and actually work through. So this next one, I actually show some of the standardization around this process that I did at Mothership. So talking through how I worked with the other parts of the company and like our VP of product in terms of how we actually work and developing a process that's standard throughout the company. So this is blurred out here just because I don't want to show it publicly, but obviously when I'm interviewing, this is actually shown in that interview. The next thing I like to do is open up with some of the design work, like talking through examples before I get into my case studies. So because I've worked on so many different things and I think I don't really focus in on one thing, I prefer to be more of a generalist in my work. I just wanted to show the range of work that I've made in the past and some of the stuff that I've been able to work on at different companies or some of my own personal products as well. I don't really talk through each one of these or anything. I really just say, hey, here's a few things that I've made. I just wanted to share it all with you so you can get a sense of some of the work that I do visually and some of the stuff that I've made in the past, something along those lines. So maybe if you want to put a slide with some of your favorite work, it doesn't have to be this many, maybe just 4 or 5. I think that's more than enough as well. But really the main part and the meat and potatoes of this interview is going to be how you do your case studies. So I'll go over how I approached it, but again, this is obviously not prescriptive. Feel free to figure out your own way, look at some other resources that maybe can help you. So the first project I showed was the Dave onboarding, which is one of the last projects I got to do at Dave before I ended up leaving. So with this, I'm actually going through my process. So just at a high level, again, these are just notes that I had in my Notion before I was like preparing. So this wasn't actually in the interview, but for the Dave case study, I went over the design system at a whole because I built that at Dave and I was actually the first designer there. So I wanted to show some of the work I did there. So I have a copy of that file that I have in my personal Figma that I showed. Then I walked through the background of like, what is this project about? What was the previous state of these designs? Like, was there any previous state? What are the goals of this that I'm trying to work through? Like, what are the KPIs and how does this tie into like business needs? So you want to really speak to all of that stuff and show that you're not just like a designer that's here to do IC work. Like, you really can think through product at a high level, because as a product designer, it's very important to think in that way. So this has been super helpful for me to approach case studies in this way when I present them. So then after that, I do a hi-fi walkthrough. So it's a smaller project, so I don't really have to show too many screens, but I just grab those and kind of walk through some of the high level parts of those. And then finally, the hi-fi is like basically the end-to-end. If there was no issues with scoping or resources, like this is the ideal state. But then I like to show quick wins as well. And what I mean by quick wins is just things that the engineers and PMs can work around that's a lot smaller in scope. So it's easier to do, maybe in 1 sprint or 2 sprints versus having to take, for example, in this case, like redoing a whole onboarding, that's going to take months and months of engineering work. So instead, what are the quick wins that we can do here? So I think that's advantageous to show when you're doing interviews, because it shows, again, that you have that business mindset, that you're trying to think about scoping and working with engineering and product, etc. So secondly, I show the Mothership app. So I like to say that this is a private project just so that people know that this is under NDA and I can't show it publicly. I actually open up those files and I go through the research and the design system and also the project, which is like the entire project from all the hi-fi, like basically the file that we handed off to the engineering team. So again, showing my notes, I go through each of these. So, I want to show context. It's important to show context up front and give backstory because people don't know about the company as much as you do. So it's important to keep that in mind. So I try and give some context setting. I show the user testing documentation and actually the recordings that we put in Slab, like I talked about in my last video. So I show how we go about like doing scripts, talk about the team that I had, which in this case was my coworker Risa at the time. I talk over, the research that we did and the decks that we actually presented, or at least give one example. Then I show the early exploration. So all the iterations that we did in terms of like lo-fi and trying to bring it to hi-fi. So what did work, what didn't work, what visually was appealing, what ended up working with user testing and prototyping and how that kind of went. Then showing how we actually develop a design system from that. So design systems are a big strength for me, so I like to highlight those in each of my projects. And then I talk about the MVP with post MVP. This just goes back to like those quick wins. So what are the things that we're actually putting in MVP? And then what were the ideas that unfortunately were out of scope for the time, but were still good ideas? So we put those in part of the file as well so that we show for post MVP, once we get this app out the door, here's the next steps that we want to take, and then prioritize those based on what's going to be the most effective for this app and what are the strengths for the app and kind of what it needs for the future. Then lastly, I showed some of the Q2 projects I did a couple weeks ago, like the last project I got to work on at Mothership. So I talk about the iterations that we did there in terms of like referrals for carriers. And then also talking about helping the company prepare for Series B, because at that time, that's kind of where we were working. And a lot of the C-level people were kind of focused on that. So how can I support them as the lead product designer there and some of the work I did? And then I like to add some extras as well. So for this case, I actually had a third case study that I was able to show if necessary. But most of the time, as you can tell, there isn't usually time to go over all that stuff. So we just ended up ending it there. So after that, I like to open the floor to questions. So obviously throughout that, you want to have like more of a conversational approach. Like if there's back and forth, asking them to stop you if they have questions and feel free to interrupt. So let them know that, but I would also give them this stop point in terms of questions that they can ask you. And then after I go through those questions, answer them to the best of my abilities, then I go ahead and actually have questions for them. So usually I'll try not to show these on screen because if they're seeing them on the screen, obviously they can start to prepare for some of the later ones before I ask them. So at this point, sometimes I'll hide my screen. I want to emphasize the importance of this part of this. So in terms of interviewing, I find a lot of more junior designers are very much getting caught up on the fact that this company is interviewing you, this company is giving you an opportunity. And while all of that is true, of course, and we want to be grateful towards that, you also need to keep in mind that you are interviewing the company as well. So you need to see, is this the company that I want to be at for the foreseeable future, for the next couple of years? Can I see myself growing here? Can I see myself working with these people? I would also urge you to ask a lot of business questions. So going back to being a product designer that's able to think holistically and think about the business, I think this is important too. So I ask North Star questions around how do they generate revenue? How does this financial model actually scale in the long run? How are we set up for success in the future? What's the ultimate goal of North Star? Do we want an acquisition? Are we looking at IPO? So for questions, obviously don't just take the questions that I have here. I would advise that you actually customize these based on the company that you're interviewing with. So I interviewed with a couple other companies and I changed the questions based on those. And then again, with the personalization, I would change out the name. You want to customize these because it shows that you're taking genuine interest in the company and you want to know specifics about the company, not just these generic questions that you came up with on Google. Anybody can do a Google search and just find what are the right questions to ask during an interview. But if they can see that you're taking this time to actually invest and figure out personal questions for this company, it's going to go a long way. So at this point, you always want to thank people for their time and the time that they took to interview you and all the questions that they were able to answer for you. So make sure you're always thanking people for their time and put your email and maybe a social media like I have here. Thanking people for their time goes a long way, so I advise you do that as well. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it's helpful for you. And let me know if there's anything that I did miss in terms of the interview process. Like I said, this is very much dependent on who you are, the company that you're interviewing at, etc. So let me know if there's anything that I may have missed or that I could improve with my process so that other people can know in the comments as well and maybe use that for their process too. Be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more videos like this one, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.